March 23, 1946, 11:47 p.m. Lucky Luciano stood across from 409 Edgecombe Avenue, Bumpy Johnson's home. Behind him, 50 armed men waited in shadows. Luciano picked up the phone. His voice was cold, final. "Pack up. We're going home." His lieutenant couldn't believe it. "Boss, we got him surrounded. 50 guns. He's finished." Lucky looked at the house one more time. "No," he said quietly. "We're the ones who are finished." This is the story of the night Lucky Luciano, the most powerful mobster in America, walked away from a war he was guaranteed to win. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand what Lucky Luciano had just been through. 8 years in prison. 8 years watching his empire crumble while he rotted in a cell. The man who had organized crime in America, who had eliminated the old mustache Pete's, who had turned chaos into profit, had been reduced to a number in prison uniform. But Lucky hadn't been idle. He'd been planning, and on February 9, 1946, he walked out of Great Meadow Correctional Facility with one goal: take back everything stolen from him. Starting with Harlem. Harlem in 1946 wasn't the same neighborhood Lucky had controlled before his arrest. It belonged to someone else now. A man named Bumpy Johnson. While Lucky was locked away, Bumpy had quietly built an empire. Numbers running, policy banks, protection rackets. Everything Lucky used to control. And Bumpy wasn't just holding territory. He was expanding it. Brooklyn, Queens, parts of the Bronx. Bumpy Johnson had become what Lucky used to be, the most powerful criminal in New York. This couldn't stand. Lucky had built the commission. He had unified the 5 families. He had created the structure that every crime family in America still followed. He wasn't going to let some upstart from Harlem keep what belonged to him. So Lucky sent a message, a simple message delivered by 3 of his best men. Give it back, or we take it back. March 15, 1946. Lucky's emissaries sat down with Bumpy at Small's Paradise. The conversation was short. "Mr. Luciano wants to sit down," said Sal Maranzano, Lucky's underboss. "He wants to discuss certain business interests in Harlem." Bumpy didn't look up from his ribs. "What's to discuss?" "The return of operations that belonged to Mr. Luciano." Now Bumpy looked up. That cold stare. "Nothing in Harlem belongs to Lucky Luciano. Not anymore." Sal's hand moved toward his waistband. "You might want to reconsider." Bumpy smiled. "You might want to finish your dinner and leave." The meeting ended badly. Sal reported back to Lucky. "He's not giving up anything. Says Harlem belongs to him now." Lucky was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that surprised everyone. "Then we go to war." But Lucky also understood respect. If he let Bumpy Johnson keep Harlem, every ambitious criminal in New York would think Lucky was weak. They would start taking pieces of his territory. His own men would start questioning his leadership. No, this had to be settled. Bumpy had to be reminded who really ran New York. The plan was simple. Overwhelming force. Lucky would surround Bumpy's house with 50 guns. Every exit covered. No escape, no negotiation. Bumpy would have 2 choices: give up Harlem or die defending it. Either way, Lucky would have his territory back by morning. March 20th, Lucky held a meeting with his captains. "We hit him at his house. Thursday night. He'll be there. He's always there on Thursday nights. Goes over the weekly numbers. We surround the place. 50 men. Front door, back door, fire escapes, rooftops. He can't run, can't fight, can't call for help. We go in, we take him out, we take back what's ours." Vincent Mangano, one of Lucky's oldest associates, asked the obvious question. "What if he surrenders? What if he just gives us everything?" Lucky lit a cigar. "Then he lives, but he leaves Harlem forever. One way or another, this ends Thursday night." Thursday, March 23, 1946. 10:30 p.m. Lucky's men began moving into position around Bumpy's building. 409 Edgecombe Avenue was a nice building, middle class, respectable. The kind of place a successful businessman might live. which is exactly how Bumpy presented himself to his neighbors. They saw a quiet man in expensive suits who minded his own business. They had no idea they were living next to the most dangerous criminal in Harlem. Lucky positioned his men carefully. Tony Accardo and 5 shooters on the front entrance. Joe Adonis and his crew on the back fire escape. Frank Costello's people on the rooftops. Lucky himself stayed across the street with a clear view of every angle. By 11, the building was completely surrounded. There was no way out. At 11:15 p.m., Lucky gave the signal. Tony Accardo approached the front door. The plan was simple. Knock. When Bumpy answered, push inside. Overwhelm him with numbers. End it quickly. Tony knocked. Once, twice. The door opened. But it wasn't Bumpy Johnson. It was a white man in a dark suit, with a badge hanging from his jacket pocket. Federal agent. "Evening, gentlemen," the agent said calmly. "I'm Agent Robert Hansen, Federal Bureau of Investigation. And you're all under arrest." Tony tried to run. That's when he saw the other agents. Coming out of cars parked on the street. Coming out of the building next door. Coming down from the rooftops. At least 30 federal agents, all with guns drawn, all moving in perfect coordination. Tony's crew was surrounded, but not by Bumpy Johnson, by the FBI. Lucky watched from across the street as his men were handcuffed and loaded into unmarked cars. 50 of his best soldiers, all arrested, all charged with conspiracy, weapons violations, attempting to commit murder, all because they'd walked into a trap. But this wasn't Bumpy's trap. This was something else. That's when Lucky saw him. Bumpy Johnson, walking out of the building, shaking hands with Agent Hansen, getting into a car with federal plates. Not arrested, not handcuffed. Treated like a colleague, like a partner. Lucky understood immediately. Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a crime boss. He was an informant. He was working with the federal government. Everything that had happened tonight, the arrests, the trap, it had all been planned. Bumpy had told the FBI when Lucky's men would be here, where they would be positioned, what they were planning. But there was something else Lucky realized as he watched Bumpy drive away with the federal agents. Something that made his blood run cold. If Bumpy was working with the FBI, then Bumpy knew everything. Every operation Lucky was planning. Every crime family he was rebuilding. Every move he was going to make. Bumpy Johnson wasn't just his enemy. He was the most dangerous enemy Lucky could possibly have. A criminal who had the full power of the federal government behind him. Lucky walked to a payphone on the corner, called his remaining crew. "Pack up," he said. "We're going home, boss." His lieutenant said, "We can regroup. Hit him somewhere else. We still got men. We still got guns." Lucky looked back at the building where his 50 best soldiers had just been arrested. "You don't understand," Lucky said quietly. "We're not fighting Bumpy Johnson. We're fighting the United States government. And nobody wins that war." That phone call changed everything. Within 24 hours, Lucky Luciano had called off every operation against Bumpy Johnson. Within a week, he had contacted Bumpy through intermediaries to arrange a peace treaty. Within a month, Lucky had officially recognized Bumpy's control of Harlem and agreed never to challenge it again. But the story doesn't end there. Because what Lucky Luciano never discovered is that Bumpy Johnson wasn't really working with the FBI. Not the way Lucky thought. The truth was much more complicated and much more clever. Here's what really happened. 3 days before Lucky's planned attack, Bumpy received a tip from one of his informants in Lucky's organization. Someone Lucky trusted, someone close to him, had told Bumpy about the 50 guns, about the plan to surround his building, about everything. Bumpy knew exactly what was coming. But Bumpy also knew something Lucky didn't. Agent Robert Hansen wasn't investigating Lucky Luciano. He was investigating Bumpy Johnson. For months, the FBI had been building a case against Bumpy's numbers operation. They had evidence. They had witnesses. They had enough to put Bumpy away for 20 years. But they didn't have Bumpy. Every time they tried to arrest him, he disappeared. Every time they raided his operations, he was somewhere else. Bumpy Johnson was always one step ahead. So Bumpy made a deal, not to become an informant, not to betray his own people, but a one-time trade. Information about Lucky Luciano's planned attack in exchange for the FBI forgetting about their case against him. Bumpy would give them 50 of Lucky's men, caught in the act of attempting murder. The FBI would get the biggest organized crime arrest in years, and Bumpy would walk away clean. The brilliant part was that Lucky would never know the truth. Lucky would think Bumpy was an FBI informant, someone too dangerous to fight. Lucky would back off, leave Harlem alone, and Bumpy would keep his empire without firing a single shot. March 24, 1946, 9:01 a.m. Agent Hansen met with Bumpy at a diner in Queens to finalize their agreement. "That was good work last night," Hansen said. 50 arrests. The biggest raid we've ever made on the Luciano family. Bumpy sipped his coffee. "And our agreement? Your case file has been closed. Lack of evidence. You're clean." Bumpy stood up to leave. "Agent Hansen," he said, "I want you to remember something. This was business. One time only. The next time you come after me, I won't be so generous." Hansen watched Bumpy walk away, knowing he'd just been outmaneuvered by the smartest criminal he'd ever met. Lucky Luciano never found out the truth. He spent the rest of his life believing Bumpy Johnson was untouchable because he had federal protection. In reality, Bumpy was untouchable because he was smarter than everyone else. He'd turned Lucky's own attack into a weapon against Lucky. He'd used the FBI to eliminate 50 of Lucky's soldiers. And he'd done it all without breaking any laws himself. The 50 guns Lucky brought to kill Bumpy Johnson ended up destroying Lucky's own organization. Most of his men spent 5 years in federal prison. Lucky himself was deported to Italy in 1947, never to return to America. And Bumpy Johnson? He kept Harlem for the next 22 years, until his death. And years later, in 1962, a reporter asked Lucky Luciano about his war with Bumpy Johnson. Lucky was living in exile in Naples, running a small restaurant, far from the power he'd once commanded. "That wasn't a war," Lucky said quietly. "That was a lesson. Bumpy Johnson taught me that intelligence beats force every time. He made me choose between my pride and my life. Smart man always chooses life." The phone call that ended Lucky's war with Bumpy Johnson lasted 30 seconds. But it changed the balance of power in New York forever. Lucky learned that some battles can't be won with guns. And Bumpy proved that the most dangerous weapon isn't violence. It's knowing your enemy better than they know themselves. If this story of strategy, intelligence, and the power of information moved you, hit that subscribe button. Drop a like if you understand that the smartest criminals don't fight wars, they win them before they start. Share this with someone who knows that real power comes from thinking 3 moves ahead. What would you have done if you were Lucky Luciano? Let me know in the comments below. But there's one more piece to this story. The informant who told Bumpy about Lucky's plan. It was someone Lucky never suspected. Frank Costello. Costello had been running things while Lucky was in prison. 8 years of being the real boss. When Lucky got out, Costello was supposed to step back. But power is addictive. And Costello had gotten used to being first. When Lucky started planning his war with Bumpy Johnson, Costello saw an opportunity. If Lucky went to war and lost, Costello could step in as leader. If Lucky won but got arrested, same result. Either way, Costello stayed in power. The tip to Bumpy wasn't random. Costello had been watching, waiting for the right moment to eliminate Lucky without getting blood on his own hands. And Lucky's obsession with Harlem gave him that chance. March 25, 1946. The day after the arrests, Costello visited Lucky at his apartment on the Upper East Side. "Terrible thing what happened to our boys," Costello said. "Bumpy Johnson must have better connections than we thought." Lucky was staring out the window, still trying to understand how 50 armed men could walk into such an obvious trap. "Someone told him we were coming," Lucky said. "Someone who knew the plan." Costello's face showed just the right amount of concern. "You think we got a rat?" "I know we got a rat. Question is who?" Lucky turned around. looked directly at Costello. For a moment, Costello thought he was exposed. But Lucky said, "Must be someone new. Someone we trusted too fast." Costello nodded sympathetically. "What do you want to do?" "Nothing," Lucky said. "We're done with Harlem. Bumpy Johnson wins this round. But I'm going to find out who sold us out. And when I do, they're going to wish they'd never been born." Lucky spent months investigating his own organization, looking for the traitor. He never found one because he was looking in all the wrong places. He suspected soldiers, associates, even rival families. But he never suspected Frank Costello, his oldest friend, his most trusted lieutenant, the man who had held everything together while Lucky was in prison. It wasn't until 1957, 11 years later, that Lucky finally learned the truth. And by then it was too late. Costello had consolidated power, eliminated rivals, built his own empire. When Lucky confronted him, Costello just smiled. You taught me everything I know about survival, Lucky." Sometimes survival means making hard choices. Lucky never returned to America. He died in Naples in 1962, still believing Bumpy Johnson had been an FBI informant. He never learned his own best friend had sold him out. The 50 guns Lucky brought to Harlem that night didn't just lose him a war. They lost him everything. His organization, his power, his country, his friendship. All because he underestimated Bumpy Johnson's intelligence. Bumpy Johnson destroyed Lucky Luciano without Lucky ever knowing how it happened. The most powerful mobster in America, taken down by a man who never fired a shot, never threw a punch, never even met his enemy face to face. Pure intelligence, perfect timing, and the ability to turn other people's weaknesses into his own strength.